I'm probably going to try and go without the microphone, but it's not too large crowd. I'm going to walk around a little bit. Is that okay if I speak without microphone? And if I could please get the lights down. Thank you. Thanks very much for that introduction again, and thanks for giving up part of your Saturday afternoon to come down and listen to this discussion on the Belitung shipwreck. It's particularly relevant to the Rila series, being some of the earliest concrete evidence of Arab participation in Southeast Asia. It's also, as has just been said, the oldest intact ship, including its cargo, ever found in Asia, throughout Asia. And more important still, the cargo of this vessel now belongs to the people of Singapore. So I'm going to discuss it in a little detail, look at the ship itself initially, and then the cargo, which will tell us substantially more about what that ship was doing. So this first slide I have up on the screen, this is pretty well what the sea cucumber divers that initially discovered this wreck saw when they first stumbled upon it. That was back in 1998 that it was first found. What we have here is a pile of Changsha ewers that have been concreted into the coral, a little bit of iron concretion, and that was standing proud of the seabed. Not much else would have been seen. There would have been broken ceramics around the outside. A lot of the stuff on the surface is broken up because of the wave action. It was shallow, it was only 17 meters deep, which for shipwrecks in this region is remarkably shallow and fantastic to work on because we've got a lot of bottom fun for our diving. So that's what they saw. The information was then passed on to a German company called Seabed Explorations. They had a license from the Indonesian government to excavate the wreck. Unfortunately, I missed out on the first season of the excavation, when probably 2/3 of the cargo was recovered. But I got there for the second season in '99, which to me was more important because we actually got down and exposed the hull. And we could have a look at what the vessel itself was. So this is what fishermen saw. As we excavated, we dug layer by layer down underneath this, and we found a lot of material, a lot of new information was found each layer as we went down. And hopefully the same will apply as we go through this little chat this afternoon. First of all, the location of the wreck. She was pretty well halfway between Singapore and Jakarta on the island of Belitung. It's an unusual place to find a wreck of this age. It was early 9th century. Most of the shipping at that time that was trading up in the South China Sea and trading with the Middle East was going down through Malacca Strait and then heading up north through the South China Sea. This one's a fair way off the route, but we'll look more into that as we look at the cargo of the vessel. This was the base camp that was set up on the northwest corner of Belitung. It's a very wise place to put a base camp. This was set up well before they actually found out about the Belitung wreck. They looked at various other wrecks around Belitung and on the bunker side of the strait. Luxury. They had beautiful big rooms there. They had a beautiful big dining area, lots of people cooking and doing maintenance and serving the offshore diving spread that were working on the wreck. They had their own private beach, their own private jetty, and if you stood up on the grass there and turned around, you see the not quite so luxurious conditions that I was living in for 2.5 months with my dozen Indonesian divers. This was our dive boat, and right there we're just setting it up, putting our gear on in preparation for beginning the second season of the excavation. That's taken from the wreck site itself, so you can see how close it is to the shore. It's about a mile out, so it's, and in the distance there you can see the little mountains there. That's close to Ujung Pandan, which is the main port on Belitung Island. And as I said before, it's just 17 meters deep. And just on the other side, the boat would have been lying down here. That's our anchor line out there. We had 4 anchor lines out on a 4-point mooring. And just the other side, another 250 meters out, was a reef. In fact, there's a system of reefs all the way along the coast there. More than likely, the ship struck that reef under full sail, bumped across the top of it, sailed on, but by that time they sprung some planks, done a lot of damage, inaccessible because of the huge cargo content, and so she just went down 250 meters after striking the reef, which is fantastic because if they go down on a reef, then with the storms that come through, then the ceramic cargo would have been completely smashed. This is the fairly basic setup we had on board the fishing boat. The divers have got scuba tanks there. The scuba tanks are just a bailout, it's just a backup for the solid air hoses they've got going up. There's a compressor over the side there. That's actually not a diving compressor, it's a paint compressor. So we used an old paint compressor with a petrol engine and put an extra filter system in there to hopefully take some of the oil out before it went into our lungs. And there's the diver here. He's gone down our dive ladder and he's going down. We had a 1 hour dive in the morning and a 50-minute dive in the afternoon with just a few minutes of decompression. So it was a wonderful place to be diving in terms of maximising our bottom time. And there's the same guy who's got to the bottom. And this is what we're using for our excavation. It's called a water dredge. So we've got some pumps on the surface that drive in high pressure water through here and create a bit of a venturi, and that sucks in water through that larger mouth there. And you just use the hand and gently fan in the sediments into the mouth of the water dredge. And it's a very controlled system. You don't lose any small artifacts. You can see everything that's going up there and do a very careful, controlled excavation. But you have to be patient and spend a lot of time, and when you dig down through the surface, this is the reward. This is a metre down below the seabed. On the surface was just all that broken material, but when we got down under the protective surface layer, the sediments and the coral, this is what we found. These are changcha bowls, and we had one particular example with some ink printing on it, which has been translated from the Chinese into the year 826. And that's the earliest dated example of a changcha. And gives a rough date for the wreck. We use various other methods to give a date also around that time, but I'll talk about that a bit more later. So in between the changcha, you can see the individual stacks are there. Probably they were originally stowed in straw, little straw cylinders to protect the ceramics. Later we'll see some various other interesting packing techniques for the changcha ceramics. As we go further in, you can actually see the work face. The divers are working in this way, and that's the wall, sometimes 1.5 meters from the top of the wreck down to the sterile layer of sand below the artifact. And there's some of the large jars. They're called gusun type jars. They're made in Guangdong province in China. Most of them were only filled with sand, sediment, shell. Originally, they were probably carrying liquids or some other material that's completely perished over the last 1,000 years. Some of them were carrying other things, as we'll see soon. Very small jars, these are only so high. But there was a big cluster of those, and I suspect they're still there. These are held in place by this lime-based compound here. And I think they were probably stored in sacks, like Hessian sacks, and it's leaked out and it's solidified under the sea. And it's entrapped all the ceramics that were in contact with the lime compound. And more than likely, that's the sort of thing that, interesting, that the Chinese used for caulking their vessels. Whenever they put the nails through, they used to put a layer of this. In between all the planks, they put a layer of this, and it would seal their ship. So this has been put on board this vessel as a cargo item. There's enough of it to conclude it was cargo rather than just there for patching the vessel as it travelled south. Larger jars, or medium-sized jars, this is down towards the stern of the vessel. They're also completely trapped within this lime compound. And it's a mixture of lime and some of the iron. There was some iron cargo as well, cast iron. And that's impossible to remove. After the excavation, there was no way, short of actually taking that entire chunk of material out, which would have adhered to the hull planking, and we didn't want to actually damage the wreck. As we were working, we were reburying the hull itself so it would be protected from torpedo worm. So when we left, those jars were still exactly as you can see in that photograph. And also we had on the wreck, despite that large quantity of ceramics, there were 60,000 pieces recovered in all. I guess about 70 to 80% of the cargo survived intact, which is remarkable for old wrecks. A lot of the old wrecks I work, even in open water, have 50% breakage. But this has been very well preserved, shallow water. The reef system perhaps protected a little bit. It was in semi-enclosed water, so not subject to a big ocean swell. But despite having all that weight, they still use lead here as a ballast, which is right at the bottom of the vessel. And in various rows, below most of the ceramics, not below all of them. And strangely enough, this lead also appeared in this one instance inside this jar. And these bars here, the ingots, are identical to the one in that previous slide, except they've used a big chisel and just chopped them in half. And they're all stowed inside a jar. The implication is that these lead bars were a paying cargo, had commercial value. So the fact that it's in that jar, the fact that it's the whole length of the ship, we estimate roughly 10 tons of lead were used as ballast within the ship. It would have been put on, served the purpose of ballast, but when it reached its final port, they would have taken it out and sold it. And then we get down to the ship itself, having excavated all the way down through that cargo. And here, it's an interesting element here. You've got the frames, very light frames for the size of the vessel. The hull planks, also very thin. These round circles are where the ceramics were, upside down, pressing into the wood over those 1,000 years has left their mark. These are called ceiling planks or floor planks. They're actually removable. They weren't attached to the hull at all. And that's what the lead bars were sitting on. There's one left up there in the corner. The others have been taken off this section. But most importantly, we see all these little holes that go down the side of every plank. When I went down to go and start the excavation on this vessel, nobody had any idea what sort of a ship it was. We knew it was Chinese cargo, knew it was 9th century. Could have been very exciting to find a 9th century Chinese junk because the next latest is the 12th century. They didn't actually start oceanic voyaging or long distance sea voyaging until around the 12th century. But clearly having these little holes along there, it's not a Chinese junk. The Chinese use nails for all their joins and they use very thick planking. Southeast Asians did have holes and they did have stitching holding the planks together. The stitching was only on the inside of the hull and each plank was carved, individually carved with big lugs on it. And the lugs were bound to the frames to hold the ship together. This had no lugs. These are individual flat planks. In fact, they're sawn. Some of the planks you can see the saw marks on it. And the whole thing was stitched together and the stitches go right through on the outside of the hull, both sides. So that was immediately evidence that we were dealing with either Middle Eastern, Arab, or an Indian ship, because at that time, 9th century, from all the evidence we have, there's no way of distinguishing between Indian and Arab based on the construction technique of this stitching. Strangely enough, an Arab ship or an Indian ship has never been found before in the Middle East, in India. This one down here in the Indonesian waters is the only one so far found. That's a detail of the stitching. This one plank that we brought up. You can see the stitching elements here. It's probably ply, coconut fibre, and that's a sketch, an idealized sketch showing the stitching system, one across and then 2 cross stitches. And it's a butt joint. The planks were just butted together. There was no scarfing, no overlap. And then they just put 2 extra stitches longitudinally just to give it a little bit more strength. That's an overview of the whole ship hull after we had excavated most of the cargo. We couldn't get it all. All this yellow center line here was that lime concretion and iron concretion. So we didn't try and remove that. So we can't see what's underneath there. That's the length of the keel. This is the bow up this end. And what's happened is the stitching has degraded quite quickly underwater. And the whole hull has collapsed out flat. So there's no cross-section of this ship. There's no way of seeing the original shape of the hull. The whole thing's just flattened on the seabed. And then the sediments have come up and covered it. And probably because of that, because the sediments could cover this large flat area, we've got an incredible amount of the hull surviving. Most of the time in Southeast Asia, you have the teredo worms who come in very quickly and devour the hull. And much more recent vessels I've worked on up in Vietnam, there's been no hull left whatsoever. The 17th century have all gone. And so we start to look at some examples of what this vessel might have been. We can't use archaeology because this is the only archaeology we're working on ourselves. We can't compare it with anything else. So we look at some of the iconography. This is actually a 13th century depiction of an Arab vessel. It's a bit hard to see in this light, but there are little stitches drawn onto this quite impressive painting. It's a bit fanciful above the deck level, but the hull itself is fairly well depicted. And another element that's very interesting is that anchor that's hanging off the bow there. There's the anchor in a bit more detail from the painting, and here's the anchor we found on the wreck site.